Welcome, Gunrunner.
Now, those of you who have been following my channel for some time will be very familiar with my greatest arcade games of all time series, where I look at the 20 most important coin ops released in each year from the dawn of the industry in 1975 to the time when home consoles started to catch up technologically, 1995. So that was 20 games for each year across 20 years. 2020 vision, I guess you could say. After that timeline was completed, I produced two more bonus videos, one looking at my own top 20 arcade games of all time, and another top 20 that was voted for by you, my viewers, and the retro gaming community at large. I fully intended to stop right there and not do any more, but then ended up doing one on 1996. Not just because you, my lovely viewers, were asking for more of them, but also because I was moving house and needed to make several weeks videos in advance, making my usual video schedule impossible. I then ended up doing 1997 as well, when I went on holiday and faced the same issue, and then the following year I found myself in the same position yet again as I went off for a week in the winter sun, meaning 1998 got out. I then found myself moving again to where I am now, and so 1999 made its appearance too. And yes, you've guessed it, a Christmas holiday prompted me to finally round off the decade, as I promised I would in that last video, and finish the series once and for all with the year 2000. And I promise this is definitely it now. So what was special about 2000 then? And what were the themes of this particular year? Well, it was very similar to 1998 and 1999 actually, as you probably guessed, with many sequels to games we saw in the previous couple of videos. However, the popularity of fighting games had tailed off somewhat, and the ever-growing popularity of driving games had pretty much taken over, with a ridiculous amount of racers released in this year. Light gun shooters were also proving very popular indeed too. So, just like a modern arcade then really. So yeah, there was very little innovation with very few new and original titles, and absolutely loads of sequels and follow-ups to existing franchises. That's not to say there was nothing worth playing though, as you'll shortly find out when I start the countdown. So let's get going then, shall we? Well, Sega had already made racing games based on the ever-popular American sport of NASCAR in the form of the Daytona USA games. But in 2000 they felt they needed to make it more official, so obtained the actual NASCAR name and licensed some popular rock music to use in the game too. But perhaps most interestingly, they didn't actually develop the game themselves and instead hired EA to do the honours, who made the home console NASCAR games at this time of course.
Line them up, one at a time. Come on, step on.
Although the first version of NBA Showtime was actually released the year before by Midway, in 2000 they followed it up with the definitive Gold Edition. The reason for this was that the original version had outdated rosters, which were fixed in the subsequent console ports, so they updated these to match the 1999 NBA season and also added a few gameplay tweaks too. The game itself was pretty much just an update of NBA Jam, but that's certainly no bad thing. Effectively just an update of Gale's Panic 4 from 1996 that adds a bunch of extra features that had previously been seen in the Sega Saturn game Gale's Panic SS. The main difference between this game and the ones that came before was that the cartoon-like nudes had been replaced with some anime models instead to make it more family friendly for arcade audiences. The same old Kicks style gameplay is still here in all its glory though, thankfully. The first Battle Gear game proved to be a big success for Taito, very much cashing in on the new drift car culture that had come to the fore in Japan, best shown to Western audiences in the film Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift. so it was inevitable that a sequel would follow. In fact, another 3 games would follow after this one, as both the series and the Japanese car culture went from strength to strength. Battle Gear 2 was very much more of the same, adding more cars and more tracks. The first Mr. Driller proved to be a surprise hit in both the arcade and on home consoles. A game that seemed almost 8-bit in nature, and indeed 8-bit versions of the game have actually been made in recent years, but was so much fun that people didn't care. One criticism of the game was that there was no 2-player mode, and yep, you've guessed it, this sequel corrects that. In fact, it's nothing more than the first game with that new mode added, so now even more fun. Despite starting life as a home computer game, Lode Runner experienced quite a bit of success in the arcades too, with no less than 5 different games based on the franchise. This is the final game in that series, and the only one that wasn't released by IRAM. The incredibly unique gimmick of this version was that it supported 2 players, with 2 separate screens, and allowed both co-op and competitive play, the latter of those being particularly enjoyable. The second game, Konami's popular GTI Club series, the name kinda gives this one away, as yes, you guessed it, this one is set in the southern European country of Italy. There are 3 tracks on offer here that take in all the best parts of the country, the mountains, the city and the beach. There is also a fantastic selection of classic cars that includes Italian favourites like the Fiat 500 and Alfa Romeo Giulia, alongside other famous hot hatches like the Mini and VW Beetle. Known as Gumbalina in Japan, a clever play on Thumbelina, this is of course the 3rd game in Namco's ever popular Point Blank series, and the very last arcade game to be based on that famous light gun franchise, which is pretty surprising when you consider how popular this genre still is in the arcades of today. This one features an incredible 60 stages of action for 1 or 2 players, with the latter option providing by far the most fun. I still remember seeing this game for the first time in arcades, and being absolutely stunned that someone had chose to remake a 1983 computer game in the year 2000. Okay, it was a pretty popular game back in the day, but I can't imagine it would have had big name appeal 17 years later. Thankfully, the actual game was pretty cool and drew you in with its huge cabinet and moving gunner seat that really made you feel part of the non-stop shoot 'em up action. The very last Cruis'n arcade game produced by Midway before the franchise took a 16-year arcade hiatus, with the 2016 release of Raw Thrills' excellent Cruis'n Blast. This one featured all the thrills and spills of the previous games, but took in much more exotic locations such as the Amazon, Atlantis and even Mars, with a host of crazy cars and characters to match, including a clown, a cowboy and an alien. Cruis'n Exotica still plays just as well today as it ever did. Gumpy is probably best known as a console and handheld game, most notably the original Bandai Wonderswan version, but it also appeared in the arcades too under Bandai's coin-op oriented Banpresto branding. This is a classic block-style puzzle game where the player has to move around fragments of lines to form a continuous stream from one side of the screen to the other. It seems weird at first, but it's actually incredibly addictive. The fourth and final game is Saibu Koihatsu's Zero Team franchise. This game is somewhat of an anomaly in the arcades of this era because it's a scrolling beat 'em up. By this time the genre had pretty much been forgotten, with one-on-one fighters becoming all the rage, and so it really stands out for the crowd. Many people argued that it looked very dated upon release, but for me it was refreshing to see an old school 2D sprite driven brawler. The San Francisco Rush games proved to be a big hit for Atari games in a very crowded arena where it seemed that every man and his dog were releasing racing games, and particularly the futuristic 2049 version of the game. This tournament edition features a new online tournament mode as well as a host of new cars and new tracks to race them across, giving players a pretty significant improvement over the original edition. Weirdly, this sequel to the hugely popular sniper simulator Silent Scope went under 3 different names depending on what part of the world you're from, being called Fatal Judgment in Europe, Dark Silhouette in North America, and Innocent Sweeper in Japan. I have no idea why, because the game is exactly the same, and very much an update on the gameplay for the original coin-op, with you using a mounted sniper rifle to take out all the criminal targets. Starting in 1990, the Raiden series was not only one of the most popular and enduring arcade shoot-'em-up franchises, but also Saibu Koihatsu's biggest success story. Subtitled Operation Helldive, this game is mostly more of the same, but was the first title in the series to introduce discoverable secrets, which included a boss rush mode, an extreme difficulty setting, and a host of different ships you can play as, including numerous nods to the previous games. Given the dominance of driving games in this list, it wouldn't be complete without a Ridge Racer title, and here we are with the 5th game in the ever popular series. The most interesting thing about this entry is that it didn't actually debut in the arcades, as Sony paid Namco a large sum of money to make it a PlayStation 2 launch title, and this coin-op actually came out some 6 months later. This was probably a sign of things to come, as it was also the very last Ridge Racing arcade game too.
Racer 5.
Despite the 2 in the name, this is actually the 4th title in the famous crossover series that pitted favourites from the Street Fighter franchise against superheroes from the Marvel Universe. Remember, the first 2 games were restricted to just the X-Men. This one features the same old one-on-one tag battles seen in previous games, but adds new 3-on-3 battles, a character assist system, and a refined control scheme that makes it more enjoyable to play than ever.
Marvel vs. Capcom 2. New Age of Heroes.
A franchise that is still going strong in the arcades of the present day thanks to raw thrills, it's actually quite remarkable that Big Buck Hunter franchise took off the way it did, given the rather controversial subject matter of trophy hunting. But murdering innocent animals didn't seem to put anyone off and proved to be incredibly fun, and it all started right here. No less than 12 sequels have followed, and that's just the arcade based titles, very much proving my point.
Big Buck Hunter.
Sega are a company known for their arcade races, but this one is quite unlike any of the rest, as it was based on a sci-fi movie rather than real life. The film in question, of course, is Star Wars: The Phantom Menace, and this game set out to replicate the famous pod racing sequence and did it incredibly well. In fact, this game proved to be so popular on release, and remains so, that you'll still see it in many seaside arcades today. Gauntlet Dark Legacy certainly isn't the game that most people would think of when talking about the year 2000, and I'm sure that many would have ranked others on this list above it. But I absolutely love the Gauntlet franchise, and in my mind this is a fitting send-off, not only as the last Gauntlet arcade game, but also as one of the very last games released under the Atari Games banner full stop. In 2000 there was nothing else quite like this in the arcades. And that rounds up my look at the greatest arcade games of 2000. Are there any other titles you can think of that should have made the list, or do you disagree with any of the entries that I did include? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons and YouTube members for continuing to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to following patrons and YouTube backers in particular for their much appreciated pledges. D. Vaughan, Albert Davis, Richard Baker, Martin Wiggins, Peter Grantham, Bernard Santu, Mins, Classic Gamer 74, Josh Hartman, Daniel Skronsky, Ben P. Stein, Tabby Kitsune, Grady Haynes, Paul Daniel, Seth A. Robinson, Climatorn, Carl Olsen, Mark Strickland, and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support this channel, you can now join as a member for as little as £2 a month, where you'll get access to exclusive videos and updates and much more. Just click the button on my community page to get started. My Patreon is also still available if you prefer to support me in other ways too. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.